a lot of questions remain up in the air as the Calgary Flames players begin to trickle back into town ahead of camp.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jessica Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is just around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and get started on planning your futures bets now. Today, we are going to take a look at just some of the questions that remain unanswered as we wrap up the month of August and begin really the start of the season with camp just right around the corner. And there are plenty of those as the Flames had a quiet off season. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We are here for you through the off season and we'll be back to daily shows before you know it. It's hard to believe that the off season is almost over. So my first question, I promise we won't talk about Rasmus Andersson too much on today's show, but we are going to talk about Connor Zary because he remains unsigned. He is one of the few remaining RFAs around the league that remains unsigned. He is the only Calgary Flame RFA that remains unsigned, and we're just kind of sitting ducks at this point. What is there left to negotiate? What does Connor Zary need to bring to the table? What does Craig Conroy need to bring to the table in order to get a deal done? But that's not my question. My question comes back to Connor Zary's potential. I think we all know that a deal is going to get done. Like, that is a no-brainer. We know that it's not like an animosity issue. It's just a dollar amount, and what the term and money looks like is anyone's guess at this point, but it will get done. I'm not overly concerned. If, camp starts and we're a few days into this thing and he's still unsigned, then we'll talk about that if we get there. But with Zary, he has shown a lot of potential and has been able to show the Flames, I would say, enough to believe that he is a player you may want to keep around somewhat long term. I think that he does bring that nice scoring touch to the game. He has the finishing touch that the Flames have been missing, and he has the versatility of playing both on the wing and down the middle. We know that the Flames have needed some center depth, and now they do have a good amount of centers, I would say, in their current roster and also in the pipeline. So where does he fit in? What can he do to stand out? I think that him and Morgan Frost are ultimately competing for the same role, same center job anyways. And if Zary doesn't win that out, then obviously he's going to be playing on the wing because it doesn't make sense to bury him. I think he has a much better season if you don't put him on a line with players that are 10 plus years older than him, a la Blake Coleman and Michael Backlund. I think that may, I don't want to say hinder his ability, but I do think that he doesn't necessarily have the same potential on that line as he would with, let's just say, a line with Coronado and Pospisil, or even Kadri and Pospisil. We saw how great that line worked their first year together. So maybe we start there and see where that momentum gets us. Because I do fully believe that we will strike gold, that Zary will strike gold at some point in terms of finding his game, finding a spot, a consistent spot in the lineup, and playing comfortably. My biggest thing here is, can he prove that he is worth his asking price and then some? Because we talked about it on yesterday's show too, do they just do a 1-year deal to get him to arbitration rights so they don't lock him up for 3 years at $3.75 million or whatever that number decides to be? Because he could go out there and have one heck of a season this year, go into arbitration if necessary. If him and the Flames can't come to a deal, he'll file for arbitration and he could walk away a couple $100,000, maybe $1 million richer. I think that it's best if players and teams avoid arbitration at all costs. Sometimes it's necessary to get something done. But if, let's say it's a 1-year deal, he goes out there and scores 15 to 20 goals, has a full healthy season, emphasis on healthy, then you see the Flames come in at a dollar amount that is likely going to avoid arbitration, in my opinion. But there's still so much time between now and then. Zary has a lot to do. He has plenty to bring to the table. It is a matter of him stepping in and stepping up. I think that it is quite possible he could earn a Marco Rossi-esque dollar amount next offseason or the offseason after that, depending on what he is able to contribute to this Flames team. But coming up next, we're going to talk about some of these fringe or depth players that may not necessarily have a long-term role with the team, but kind of plug a hole. And are there instances where you may have to take one or two of them out, place them on waivers to allow a player like Aydar Suniev come in and light up the NHL? The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a cannot miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it is super easy to use. You can put together same game parlays, and it makes the game a lot more exciting, and I'm a little more invested when there's a few bucks on the line. It's quick, easy, and it's the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. Could you be placing a futures bet on Micah Parsons as he was traded to the Green Bay Packers earlier today? So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. When I talk about fringe players, I'm talking about guys that are like Ryan Lomberg or Adam Klapka, Joel Hanley, Miromanov, Jake Bean. I would maybe consider throwing Braden Pahal in there depending on where things are at. But I think Braden Pahal has really solidified himself as a third pairing defenseman for the Flames. But these are players that I think are potentially, I don't think Pospisil necessarily fits into this exact category, but Lombo, Bean, and Miromanov, and maybe Joel Hanley are players that are potentially taking a roster spot from a player that could be making the jump to the NHL. I think of the defensive pairings, and I think of, Hunter Brusewicz. I think of Jeremy Poirier, who has yet to make his NHL debut. Solo, Yan Kuznetsov. There's 4 or 5 players right there that should be getting a look at the NHL level. And I understand it takes time. We know only so much and only see so much, but I think at some point you have to take a look at what's in-house at your NHL level and look at what's on the cusp and say, why can't we go with what we've stocked the cabinet with versus what's old and maybe moldy and outdated and replace it with something fresh? Maybe that's a little harsh, but I do think at some point this season, we're going to have to see players like Joel Hanley come out of the lineup. Or players like Ryan Lomberg. I do not think that they trade Ryan Lomberg by any means. I do not think that they do anything to jeopardize the culture and motivation that he brings to the room, the energy, the electricity. But I think, Aydar Suniev was a scoring leader in the NCAA for UMass Amherst, won a national championship, and, he he signed his ELC, and I think it's time for him to. He played one game last season with the Flames, last game of the season. But I do feel like he has the potential to come in and tear it up. I think that if you sit on something like this for too long, you end up with a Jacob Pelletier or a Matthew Phillips type situation. You can't just let them sit and this goes for all players. You can't just let them sit in the AHL and marinate forever. At some point, you have to let them consistently see time in the NHL. And I don't think that Suniev has been mismanaged by any means. This is just the beginning for him. But I do think that everyone should keep him on their radars when it comes to players that maybe should be playing at the NHL level. It would not hurt the Flames, especially if they're out of a playoff spot at the deadline and even a little bit beyond that, to sit some of their older players, depending on, the situation, and let the young kids play. I think that you have to let Kuznetsov and Solo have consistent reps in the NHL this year. It is only fair to them. But again, there's a logjam. And I think this has been part of the pieces that Conroy has been picking up these last 3 off seasons. You can't just assume because, okay, this defenseman's 22. He's ready to play at the NHL level. He might not be an NHL player, so you can't just throw everything out the window. But you don't know until you try it. And it can't just be a quick, small sample size. Which, again, is why I want to see Rory Kearns in the NHL this season for more than just 4 games. He had, 4 points in 5 games or something of that nature. He had 2 assists in the first period, both on Jacob Pelletier goals in his NHL debut. Like, sure, why not? And he is a centerpiece that the Flames could use. Even if he's not Patrice Bergeron or Anze Kopitar. He's not Mitch Marner. But you know what? He's young, he's fast, and has offensive upside. Let him play. And we talk about Michael Backlund. This is his last year on his current contract, and he's talking about, I want to be a Flame when when Scotia Place opens and I want to be on that roster opening night. Okay, well, let's pump the brakes because I was ready to demote him to the fourth line and send him out to pasture. Obviously, can't do that if he's still playing very well and if he's healthy. I think there has to be some sort of line in the sand because these next 2-3 years are very valuable for players that you just drafted, like Cole Rushney, like Cullen Potter, like Suniev, like Brustowicz, like Parekh. Like, there are players that need to have multiple cracks at it before you decide their future one way or another. And my hope is that everything goes to plan. But it's the Calgary Flames, it's hockey, it's life. Things are not going to go to plan, as nice as that would be. My goal this year would be to integrate as many young players as you possibly can. If you have to put Miromanov or Jake Bean on waivers, you put them on waivers. Teams were offering you something for Miromanov last year around the deadline, and you didn't take it. That baffles me. I do not understand that in the slightest. We saw how horrible he played. Like, teams were probably doing you a favor if they gave you more than a bag of pucks. Jake Bean, I understand he has the Calgary connection. His dad used to be part of the Calgary Sports Entertainment Group, but he should not be in this lineup over guys like Parekh or Brustowicz, in my humble opinion. But I think that there's still time for plenty of things to play out and unfold. But at the end of the day, we have a lot that we're looking to accomplish this season. And would you consider this team better than the team last year? Because their goal is to still make the playoffs, but there weren't too many offseason moves that led me to believe things will end any differently. Coming up next on Locked On Flames. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's your 401k or your properties or investments, and you don't have the full picture. And if you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch Money is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And that's my favorite part about Monarch Money, is that it's easy to use and I'm not using any sort of formulas to calculate the results. I just opened a 401k at my new job. I have a wedding I need to save for. I've got student loan debts I need to pay down. There is a lot of moving parts, and Monarch Money keeps everything organized for me, so I know where I can put a little extra or where I need to cut back. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with me today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Jess Belmosto. This offseason, I would say, other than not trading Rasmus Andersson, was a success. I think that it went fairly well. Free agency didn't leave me ripping my hair out, and Craig Conroy didn't make any Brad Treliving-esque moves. There were no 7-year deals handed out to 27-year-olds. Like, I'm really liking what we're seeing. And Conroy had a great draft once again. So it feels like things are trending in a positive direction in that manner. But not much has changed. You're still going into the season with Rasmus Andersson as of right now. There is no update on, Connor Zary. There weren't any needle-moving deals made. And that's fine. Because to me, the Flames aren't in a position where they need to be making a splash. Do I think that they'll probably sign a player or two to a PTO? More than likely. It wouldn't surprise me. But is this team going to make the playoffs? When you look at this roster, do you see a team that hangs out on the fringes like, let's say, the Montreal Canadiens last season? Or, who else was there? I mean, the Wild, they didn't make the playoffs, but they were still on the cusp. The St. Louis Blues or the Winnipeg Jets. Like, do you see yourself in the same category as any of those teams? Because I think most of those teams, what immediately comes to mind is their scoring. Okay? The Wild have Kaprizov and Marco Rossi. They've got Matt Boldy. Their goaltending is a little questionable, but I think goaltending is a lock for the Flames, so I'm not worried about that. But the Canadiens have Cole Caulfield. They've got Patrick Laine. They've got Nick Suzuki. St. Louis, they've got Jordan Kyrou. They've got Rob Thomas. Like, there's still a number of players that set those teams apart from the Flames. The Flames are missing their Mark Scheifele. They're missing their Kyle Connor. Well, he's not even a Jet anymore. But they're missing key pieces that would make them a perennial contender. And that's what these drafts are for, and what developing players will do. Granted, you're not going to find a Nathan McKinnon or a Sidney Crosby at 16th. That just doesn't happen. And I'm fine with the Flames missing the playoffs, but I don't want them to finish 16th. I want to see them finish likely closer to the top 10 if possible. And I think that would be a win. I don't think that this team is going to go out and be better than last year's team. I think that there are, Rasmus Andersson was bad last year. But I don't necessarily think he's going to be worse this year. However, I think you may see a scenario where he isn't playing 22 minutes a night. I think you see the offense stay the same or take a further step back. I mean, you can go from the second lowest scoring team in the league to the lowest scoring team. And I think that would help the Flames if they did that. And I think that would also put things into perspective a little bit, maybe for not so much Conroy and Huska, but the people that are making decisions above them. Because at the end of the day, it's all about making those guys happy. Nothing really, and I don't mean this negatively. I mean this like logistically. I don't see this team being better than last year. I see them being about the same or worse. And, maybe you get lucky and Matt Coronado has a 30-goal season. Sharon Govich bounces back. Morgan Frost has a great season. Oh, look there's Joel Farabee scoring 20 goals. Maybe you get that. Maybe you find that. Huberdeau hits 25 goals. Kadri hits 30 again. Like, maybe you find that. But there's no way for me to hang my hat on saying that's certainty. And if I had to put money on it, I would say that this team is not making the playoffs as of August 28th, 8:30 p.m. And I would love to know what y'all think. What are some of your questions? What do you expect out of this Flames lineup? Do you think that the Sharks will be better than them? Do you think that this team is a draft lottery team? Or are you pretty confident that they're going to make the playoffs? Let me know. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. And I will be back tomorrow. We're going to do a special episode tomorrow. And I will leave it at that. So make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you all later.